Keep going. Run out that way. Keep going.
Run. That's the first rule when faced with an active gunman.
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
And if you cannot run, then you try to hide. This shopper cannot see what's happening, but they can hear the shots. Outside, the devastation of the attack is everywhere. There are dead bodies scattered across this car park, and you can hear the distress from those who've had to find them.
Active shooter.
These shoppers in El Paso are trapped in fear of their lives. But here, armed officers have entered with their guns trained. And those hiding can now escape. 3,000 people came to this shopping center during the busy back-to-school season. 20 of them were murdered in the first of 2 US mass shootings in under 24 hours, and the third in the last week. This image taken from CCTV reportedly shows the suspect. He has been named locally as 21-year-old Patrick Crucius. The man is currently in police custody, but this attack is more than a mass shooting. It's a domestic terror investigation.
Right now we have a manifesto from this individual that indicates to some degree it has a nexus to potential hate crime.
El Paso was on the much politicized US border with Mexico. It is overwhelmingly Hispanic. Ahead of the shooting, a manifesto which appears to be linked to the attack was posted online. It warned that white Americans should fear other races and suggested a return to segregation. It also used racist language and cited the so-called Hispanic invasion of Texas. El Paso is also the hometown of the man hoping to win the Democratic nomination for president, and he did not hold back on where he lay blame.
The president's language, his rhetoric, has produced the kinds of hate crimes that we saw in El Paso yesterday, but we've been seeing across this country. They've been on the rise for each one of the last 3 years. So we cannot act as though this were just some kind of natural disaster or a matter of course for this country or the new normal for the United States. There is a very real cause to this, and President Trump is part of that.
But on Twitter, President Trump called the shooting tragic, an act of cowardice, and a hateful act. And today he tweeted about those affected by the mass shootings in Texas and Ohio. He asked God to bless both communities. 9 people have been confirmed dead in the Ohio mass shooting this morning. The gunman was named as 24-year-old Connor Betts. He was shot dead by officers, and police say most of his victims were black. But today's news is part of an intensifying American tragedy, and as yet, this nation's tradition of gun violence shows no sign of ending.
Well, in the last few moments, the authorities in Ohio say the 22-year-old sister of the suspect there is one of the 9 people killed. Earlier, I spoke to the El Paso author Richard Parker, who witnessed the aftermath of the Texas shooting. I started by asking him how the Hispanic community was reacting to this awful tragedy.
Well, El Paso, on the American side alone, is an overwhelmingly Hispanic city. I myself grew up here. I'm a native of El Paso, and I am of Mexican descent myself. And so, you know, almost 90% of the population here is Hispanic, just on the U.S. side of the border. Like any mass shooting in the United States, what we have seen is the city kind of shut down. People react in fear, frankly. The streets were empty yesterday afternoon and well into the evening. Restaurants, bars that are generally quite popular or busy on a Saturday night simply closed. And it was really out of not a sense of trepidation about another shooting, but because of the shock, frankly, and in mourning for the people who were lost.
It's reported that the alleged killer put out a kind of manifesto online talking of a Hispanic invasion. How do you react to such language? What do you make of it?
To be entirely blunt with you, the language of the manifesto could just as well have been written by the White House press office. These are the kinds of lines, almost verbatim, that appear in the speeches and talks of the President of the United States, President Donald Trump. And that was the thing that jumped out at me most. There is a very strong and, in my view, inextricable link between the events of yesterday and the sort of 3 years of targeting Latinos in this country, not merely immigrants, but Hispanics, whether they are citizens, legal residents, or none of the above.
That is an incendiary claim you make about Donald Trump. I mean, I'm sure he would say the responsibility for these awful killings rests with the gunman alone. What connection can you realistically make between the rhetoric of many politicians, including the president, and this hateful violence that we're seeing?
It's really quite simple. If you read the manifesto, which is not yet confirmed by the authorities, I would concede, it's crystal clear, and in fact the gunman writes this, that his hope in killing Hispanics is not simply about killing immigrants, but in fact about driving Hispanics out of the United States. Now, it has been done in small episodes before in our past, over 100 years ago, right here in Texas. But this is the most targeted and most lethal attack on Latino Americans in the United States in our nation's history.
How on earth do you erase those bitter divisions, that you're seeing emerging in the political rhetoric? How do you build bridges in this case?
Well, to be quite candid, we have two problems. We have a Trump problem, admittedly, but we also have a gun problem in America. I'm a Texan, I own guns, and I'm a hunter. And I have no problem with those kinds of weapons. We have 300 million guns. We have almost as many guns as we have people. Until we can put a cap and begin to reduce the number of those military-grade weapons that are for sale, we will continue to endure this. And that is not the president's fault by any means. However, we also have a Trump problem, frankly. He has incited hatred towards Muslims, towards African Americans, and in this case with great lethality towards Latino Americans too.
Richard Parker, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.